Hello, everybody. Welcome to the TeaTime podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Once again, we are at the awkward part of the show where I am waiting for people to show up. And because TikTok is not working for me at the moment, I was unable to make an announcement. So, we're just going to hope that everyone remembers or that Stereo sends them a notification or something like that. But yeah, housekeeping. Like TikTok is not letting me post right now for whatever reason. I can see the videos that I'm trying to post. I'm not shadow banned or post banned or anything like that. um, but I'll post a video and it says it has 0 views. So that's great. We love when that happens, right? And yeah, just some more housekeeping things as people show up. Make sure that you're following me on social media if you're not already. Uh, Twitter and Instagram are both spirituality. I'm really bad at posting on Instagram, but I run my mouth on Twitter daily. And that's kind of where you can see another side of me just beyond WitchTok me, right? Um, so that's, yeah. And obviously follow me on TikTok. Both my pages on TikTok are spirituality. Hopefully TikTok will be working again soon, and the videos that I tried to post today will show up at some point. Um, but yeah. Oh, and also make sure that you go to my Patreon if you haven't already. You'll be able to access the recordings to these shows and get a bunch of other cool, fun perks if you subscribe to my Patreon. I think I had one other announcement, but I forget what it was. So let me put in my disclaimers before getting into the topic of today. One, everyone is welcome here, even though we're talking about witchcraft and witch talk. You do not have to practice witchcraft or paganism or whatever to be welcome here. Everyone of every belief system and every religion is welcome here, as long as you come with an open mind and you want to learn. Disclaimer number 2, feel free to ask me questions during the show while I am talking. I always have a section at the end of the show where I take questions. But if you have a question during the show, or if the audio cuts out, or if you don't understand something or whatever, please feel free to ask during the show. So today's TikTok, whoa, that's not right. Today's podcast, I hate that I can't edit when I mess up now. Today's podcast is about witchcraft beyond WitchTok. It's chosen by my patrons on Patreon because in some of my tiers you can vote on potential podcast topics. So this week is witchcraft beyond WitchTok. Now, if you are listening to this, chances are it's because you follow me on TikTok. If you're just a random person who saw this chat on Stereo and you're like, who is this person and why is she here talking about witchcraft? Hi, I'm Hannah. I go by Spirituality on TikTok, where I have over 250,000 followers, and I post educational content on witchcraft and some comedic sketches here and there as well. So that's why I think that I'm somewhat qualified to talk about witchcraft. I'm also a practicing witch. And witch talk is growing more and more popular, and there's good things and bad things about that. Some of the good things about it is that it builds community. I've made a lot of new friends because of witch talk, and a lot of these witch talkers have helped keep witchy small businesses in business over the course of the pandemic. Metaphysical shops have thrived because of witch talk. So there's that. I just got a voice message, so let's see what it says.
Like, is there a diploma of witchcraft?
That's a great question. Witchcraft is one of those things where you can absolutely take classes about it, or you can just start practicing it. Kind of, how there's some jobs where you can get a degree to do that job, or there's just jobs where it's the same job, but you don't have a degree. You just kind of practice and you learn as you go, if that makes sense. So you don't necessarily need any sort of certificate or diploma in order to practice. You just need to study, which is something that I'm going to be talking about here. And I'll give you some resources of study. But if you want to take witchcraft classes, there are lots of classes online, and I'd like to think that I post some educational content as well. I got another voice message, so let's see.
Okay, cool. So do you have a broomstick and a cauldron?
So I don't have like a witchy broomstick just because I live in a really small apartment and I don't have room for one right now. I do have a really little cauldron. It's it's not like a pot that you would put on the oven, like it's about the size of my fist. It's pretty small. So I just use that for very little things. And the smoke detectors in my apartment are really sensitive, so I can't burn a whole lot to either. I will be moving soon, so hopefully I will be able to incorporate more tools into my craft, and that's also something that we're going to talk about in this episode. Um, but like I said, if you're interested in WitchTok, you literally just go to TikTok and type in WitchTok in the search, and you'll find so much. Um, WitchTok is great for comedy, like if you understand witchy humor and you need a good laugh, it's great. And you can learn things from Witch Talk, but just like any other social media platform, the internet is not always reliable. So let's see what we got here.
Are you going to be talking about how you started studying yourself?
Yes, I'll talk about that a little bit. Um, I almost feel like if you guys want to know more about me or my story, I feel like that almost needs to be its own show. I have posted a YouTube video about that. I think my first YouTube video, like how I became a Christian witch, that's kind of explains it. And everyone tells me that I need to write a book sharing my story. I have an outline, but if that ever happens, it's probably not going to be for several years. But yes, I will touch on that a little bit here. Now, the main point of tonight's show is just, you know, you can't trust everything on the internet. We know that. So, obviously, it's difficult to talk about the entire history of witchcraft in, an hour or so long show, right? So, I'm going to give you a brief history of witchcraft and how the craft has evolved into today and how many falsehoods have evolved, especially due to the internet and due to witch talk. And I want to try and debunk those falsehoods. And if when that comes up, if you think of, oh, yeah, I remember hearing blah, 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 and I know that that's not true, absolutely send me a voice message telling me, about it, because my goal with this episode is to educate people on what witchcraft is really about. Let's see what we got here.
Oh yay, I love the history of religion.
Topic, and like I said, we're not going to be able to cover all of it because there's literally so much. But yeah, that's where we'll start. Let's start with some let's do a little history lesson here. So, where did all of this kind of start? If you look at the beginning of time, early peoples assigned a divinity to everything. And the base example that I can give is the sun. Thousands of years ago, before we had proper understandings of outer space and astronomy, early peoples thought that the sun was a god. And when the sun set, they didn't know that the sun was going to come back in the morning. So they would give offerings and chants and dances and things like that in hopes that the sun would come back. And obviously it did, because we know how the sun works now, right? But they didn't know that back then. And so yes, they assigned a deity to the sun. And obviously assigned deities to other things, to water, to plants, to animals. And they would perform rituals before hunting and gathering and things like that. They would, you hear like about civilizations that do rain dances to bring on rain, real thing. And there are some cultures that still do that today for their crops. Um, obviously, with the evolution of science, we know how a lot of things in the natural world and in outer space work now. That doesn't mean that you can't still see those things as divine, though. So that's kind of how it started. It started with the sun, and then everything else kind of gradually was assigned a deity as well. And those deities spread throughout culture. And there's many different theories about pagan deities. There's a theory that all of these pagan deities exist somewhere. And then there's a theory that there is only one god and one goddess, but they just go by different names in various cultures. I'm going to leave that up to you. You guys can believe whatever it is that you want to believe. But that's kind of how the idea of seeing nature and divine got started. And again, even as science advanced, paganism still thrived. Even as we began to learn to understand how those things worked, we still kept those gods assigned to those things. Even though we know how the sun works now, I still have tons of followers that worship Apollo. You know what I'm saying? So, like I said, it gets more complex than that, but that's kind of where it began, right? And then we get into Christianity. Now, a lot of people think, a lot of Christians think that Christianity hit and then boom, all of a sudden everyone was Christian. That's not how that happened. A lot of nations, and for example, Rome, a lot of these nations were deemed a Christian nation just because their ruler was Christian, even if the majority of the people were still pagan. If the ruler was Christian, it was deemed a Christian nation. But because these rulers were Christian, they obviously wanted to try and convert their pagan people to Christianity as well. So what they did was they built churches on top of sacred pagan sites. So that if the pagans wanted to go to their sacred sites to worship, they had to go into church. And they actually had slave labor of a lot of pagan peoples to build their churches as well. And this is why, at times, in really, really old churches, you can see pagan symbolism built in throughout. But because this pagan symbolism was put into the churches, the pagans were still able to kind of worship their gods in secret, or some of their gods were made into saint figures. Saint Brigid or Brigid. She originates from the Celtic goddess Brigid, and she was turned into a Catholic saint so that she could still be worshipped by the pagans, but then the pagans could also be like, "Oh, I'm still having this relationship with my goddess," if that makes sense. So, even though Christianity was enforced and paganism was made illegal, pagan and witches still found a way to have their religions thrive, even when it was illegal. So, we just covered, 4,000 years in about 5 minutes, right? That doesn't even begin to encompass it. But I'm hoping that that gives a brief understanding of, like, oh, that's how it started. That's where it came from, right? Which leads us into Wicca, which is not my favorite subject, but I think it's something that needs to be talked about. Now, for those of you who are new here or who don't know, there is a difference between Wicca and witchcraft. Witchcraft is a practice that anyone can do regardless of their religious beliefs, contrary to popular belief. Some people be like, Christians can't do witchcraft. You can't do this if you blah, 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 blah. That's not true. I'm a Christian. I'm a witch. I put up with the hate comments. Do whatever you want, okay? Witchcraft in of itself is not a religion. It's a practice. Wicca is a religion that incorporates witchcraft. Okay? But in order for witchcraft to be modernized and more accepted in the way that it is today, I do feel that it is important to mention Wicca and the story of Wicca, because even though there are some problematic themes with Wicca going on today, which I will touch on in a moment, Wicca was still kind of the gateway for witchcraft to be more accepted in society. So I do want to talk about that. So modern Wicca, I really want to emphasize that because there's like old Wicca and modern Wicca, and I will distinguish between the two in a moment. Modern Wicca was quote unquote discovered by a man named Gerald Gardner. And Gerald Gardner, I forget what his day job was, but uh, he was traveling in Europe and he was fascinated with the occult and whatnot. I want to say he was a Freemason. He may have been in the Golden Dawn. I might be wrong. Don't quote me on that. But he was fascinated with the occult regardless, right? And he was traveling throughout Europe and he came across this group of people who were still practicing witchcraft, or what this group of people referred to as Wicca. So Gerald Gardner didn't discover Wicca. It was already being practiced. He just helped modernize it. So whenever you hear Wiccans talking about Gerald Gardner, it's with the understanding that he did not invent Wicca. He did not invent witchcraft. He just helped it become a bit more normalized in society, right? So Gerald Gardner discovers this group of people who are practicing this religion called Wicca, and he asks if he can study them. And they accept, and he gets initiated into their coven and starts learning their ways and the things that they do. Now, I believe it was in 1951 when the last laws against witchcraft were finally removed, and it was safe for witches and pagans to be in the public eye. Now, by this time, Gerald Gardner had been studying Wicca for a handful of years, and he went to his coven and asked if he could write a book about Wicca and witchcraft and publish it for the world to see. And I think it took some persuading, but eventually they agreed. And this was kind of a gateway to many other witchcraft and pagan communities who were kind of hidden under the shadows, who had previously been practicing their craft illegally because it had been illegal, but now it wasn't illegal anymore. This book, or many books that Gerald Gardner published, allowed them to kind of come out of the shadows and be like, hey, there's more people out there like me. Hey, there's more people out there who think the same way that I do. It was the gateway. Now, Wicca unfortunately appropriates a lot of things from Judaism and other religions, and that's why problematic. I am not a Wiccan. I'm a witch, but I'm not a Wiccan. Now, I've met many Wiccan people who are lovely people, and maybe they don't intend to be appropriative. I'm not saying all Wiccans are bad people, right? I There's just some things within the traditional Wiccan practice that don't quite sit right with me. But like I said, you have to give credit where credit is due, and I believe in that. And Wicca was the gateway for witchcraft as we know it today to become modernized. So as more covens and forms of witchcraft began to emerge, there were people who decided, I don't want to do Wicca, but I want to do witchcraft my own way. Thus, the way of the eclectic witch, which is what I would consider myself. I am an eclectic witch. I do not conform to one single tradition or the other. I do consider myself a Christian witch because I work with and worship Jesus. But I would also say that I'm a Christo-pagan because I work with and worship pagan deities as well. Um, and that was kind of what hooked me, when I was researching Christian witches, and then I learned that there was such a thing as Christo-paganism. I was like, okay, it was the same thing, right? Like, oh my God, there's other people out there like me. There's other people out there who think the way that I do and who like the things that I like. And I think that that is a very important thing to have, which is one of the things that makes WitchTok great. I discovered WitchTok completely by accident. For some reason, one day, a WitchTok compilation was in my YouTube suggested thing, and I watched it and I was hooked. And I joined, and here I am now. And I've been able to, like I said, make a lot of new friends and make this community and have a lot of people supporting me through various family issues that I've had over the fact that I am a practicing witch. So there's a lot of good things that come with witchcraft being modernized, with it being normalized, and with it being spread across the internet for any and everyone to have access to. However, as I've said before, you can't trust everything that you see on the internet, especially on social media. And because of that, many falsehoods about witchcraft have spread. And some of those falsehoods do come from Wicca. So, for example, one falsehood in particular that I can think of from Wicca is the threefold law. Now, if you are Wiccan and you want to subscribe to the threefold law, that's fine. But if you're not Wiccan, you don't have to. And if you don't know, the threefold law is basically saying whatever energy you give out into the universe will come back to you times 3. So if you do a positive spell, a positivity will come back to you times 3. And the same thing with negative energy. Basically, a way of saying don't spread negative energy, karma's a bitch kind of thing. A lot of witches who are not Wiccans do not subscribe to that philosophy. If you're Wiccan and you subscribe to it, that's fine. But it does have a lot of problematic energies in the way that it kind of shames people who practice baneful magic. Which is not something that I don't shame anyone for any way that they practice, you know? Another falsehood that comes from Wicca is the need for very extravagant tools. Now, one of the books that I recommend for beginner witches is actually The Complete Book of Witchcraft by Raymond Buckland, who was Wiccan. And while there are lots of beginner resources in that book, one of the things that I always say to people when they pick up that book for the first time is don't worry about the supplies. Because despite all the other good things in that book, there's like a whole section about like how to make your own cloak and how to build your own altar and what specific direction it should be facing to get like just this really wild extravagant stuff that if you're Wiccan, sure, maybe that's for you and maybe that's what you want. But if you're just dipping your toes into witchcraft for the first time and you reading that for the first time, you're like, oh my God, how am I supposed to build my own table? And, you know, like it's going to be very overwhelming. Um, and I feel like WitchTok has unfortunately kind of solidified that as well because everyone wants to have, you know, pretty tools and pretty crystals to show off on their TikTok page. And I do this too. I totally admit to that. But I also try to emphasize in my videos that you don't need super expensive tools. You know, I was talking earlier about how I have a cauldron that was gifted to me. That cauldron was probably about $50. It was on my Amazon wish list. And someone gifted it to me, which I'm very thankful for. Person who gifted it to me, if you're listening, thank you. But you know, not everyone has $50 to spend on a pretty cauldron. One of my statues on my altar is a statue of Lilith, and again, was gifted to me. It was $80. Not everyone has $80 to go buy a statue dedicated to their deity. So whether it's through Wicca or through WitchTok or whatever, that's just something else that I wanted to address is the need for extravagant tools in order to be a proper witch. And we'll talk about the things that you can use in your craft in just a moment. This kind of helps me transition into my next point of other falsehoods that are on the internet. And again, if you think of any that you've heard yourself, please feel free to chime in. But on Patreon, I asked my patrons, hey, what are some falsehoods about the craft or spirituality in general that you've seen floating around TikTok that are just not correct? So someone said, oh, where is it? Oh, the idea that all you need is intent. So this goes back to my point earlier. You don't need extravagant tools in order to be a good witch. However, there's a lot of people who say you don't need tools at all. All you need is your mind. All you need is willpower. All you need is intent, and your spells will come true. That's true to a certain degree, but not all the time. For example, there are specific herbs that are meant to do specific things. If you say, I'm going to use stinging nettle in a love spell, and I'm just going to have intent that it's going to work, that's not how that works, because stinging nettle has specific properties for baneful magic. If you say, I'm going to put red pepper flakes in a jar with my partner's name on it and just intend that it's not going to harm them, that's not necessarily how that works, because it has the properties for baneful magic. So, the idea that you need extravagant tools is a falsehood. But when you have tools, you should know how to use them properly, and you should know the resources for them. Now, instead of spending $60 on a hand carved wand, and if you are able to do that and you want to do that, that's fine. But honestly, you can go out to your backyard and get a stick and be like, boom, this is my wand for my witchcraft. If you can't afford to buy a protection crystal, go outside, find a rock, draw a sigil on it, boom, that's your protection rock. I'm of the belief that you should still have tools. And if you're using things like herbs and crystals, those have specific uses for specific things, and those should be followed. The idea that your intent can change the properties of a crystal or an herb is not how it works. However, intent does come into play if you're on a budget and you need to have inexpensive tools. As long as you're using a burn safe dish, to burn things in, birthday candles work just as fine as regular spell candles, as long as you have intent. Your protection rock will work just as fine as a protection crystal, as long as you have intent. So intent works for things like that, but not when it comes to trying to switch properties of other things. Does that make sense? One of my other patrons said that a falsehood that they heard was that deities only have a single aspect to them, and this could not be more false. So, for the example that I'm going to give is the Norse god Loki, who I work with personally. Now, Loki is the god of chaos. That is what he is known for the most, is being a god of chaos, right? And there's tons of WitchTok videos, usually comedic, talking about that. But that's not the only aspect to Loki, because the gods do not have singular aspects to them. So, yes, Loki is chaos, but he is also passion, change, cooking, and many other things. A lot of hearth witches work with Loki because he helps with the home cooking and the hearth. So the idea that deities only have they may have a dominant quality, but no deity has only a singular quality. The idea that tarot cards have to be gifted to you is another falsehood. I promise you, you can buy your own tarot cards. I really don't know where this myth came from, but there is a myth that your first tarot deck must be gifted to you. You cannot buy your first tarot deck. It has to be given to you by someone else. Now, maybe in Romani culture, where tarot is very popular and is a little bit different than how we do it here, maybe that is the case. But if you're not a part of that specific culture, you can go buy your own tarot deck. It's okay, I promise. That being said, tarot is also not a closed practice. Now, if you don't know what a closed practice is, a closed practice is one that you either have to be born or initiated into. And there are some people who on WitchTok will be like, no, tarot is only for the Romani people. We should not be using it. That's not true. The Romani people have said themselves that anyone can use tarot. They have certain ways that they use tarot that are just for them, but we're allowed to. It's okay. Tarot is not closed. That being said, There are closed practices that do exist and should be respected, which is another thing I see on WitchTok. I see people using white sage all the time, or using voodoo spells when they're not a part of that culture, and it just boils my blood. So as I said, a closed practice is one that you either have to be born into or initiated into. White sage is used in indigenous practices. So if you are not indigenous or you've not been initiated into indigenous practices, you should not be using white sage. Voodoo and hoodoo are closed magical practices. If you are not born into those traditions or you've not been initiated into those traditions, you should not be practicing. A really popular example, I believe his name is Mystic Dylan. I think that's what he goes by. Um, he is a voodoo practitioner. He was not born into voodoo, but he was initiated. He sought out a teacher and he went through the proper training to practice voodoo. And now he is able to ethically practice that. Now, even though closed practices are not for everyone to practice, you can and should research and learn about them. They're very fascinating. You shouldn't do them, you shouldn't perform them, but you should learn them. You should ask questions. And if you feel yourself being pulled to them, you cannot just start practicing them. You should seek out a professional, a teacher, a guide who is willing to teach you. And that is what Mystic Dylan did. He started researching voodoo, learning more about it, and understood the implications, understood that, okay, if I want to do this, I have to find a teacher. And he did, and he got initiated, and now he's a practitioner. So he has a really cool story. If you're curious about closed practices and initiations and things like that, that is something, or someone, I should say, that I'd recommend you look into is Mystic Dylan. But that kind of leads me into the next section. So let's say social media is arguably the easiest thing to use, right? I can't tell you how many times I've been like, I'm just going to scroll through TikTok and see what all the witches are doing today. What spells are we doing this week? Because it's easy. And TikTok is fun and people post fun witchy skits and stuff, like it's a fun app to use. But there's a lot of contradicting things. So what do you do when you be like, well, this witch says that you can do this, but this witch is saying that you shouldn't do this. And the other witches are calling out the first witch. And that, when that fun WitchTok drama starts, what do? You research. And there are lots of things that you can do to research. Honestly, a lot of times a Google search will give you a fairly good answer. But it is also important to just do your independent research in your own time. Now, if you go to my TikTok page and you click the link in my TikTok bio, somewhere on my link tree, you will find a beginner witchcraft and spirituality resource list where I have included lots of books and websites that I recommend for beginners, with all of my disclaimers about all of their flaws, because no book or website is going to be perfect. Just because something is in a book does not make it fact. And it doesn't mean that you have to do it. The beauty of witchcraft is that you can do it your own way. You can form it to your own wants, your own needs, your own abilities. And so if you read something in a book about witchcraft and you're like, well, I really like this thing on page 15, but this thing on page 32, I don't really want to do, that's fine. You can mold it to your own life and your own ways, which is great. But yeah, you're not going to like or agree with everything that you read in every book or see on every website. But it's good to expand your horizons beyond TikTok. And, people will go to their favorite witch talkers all the time and be like, I want to be a witch. What do I have to do? And we all say the same thing: research. But I also understand that a lot of beginners might not know what to research. So I would say start off with researching things like crystals and herbs. What can you use them for? What are their correspondences? Or look up certain emotions, like what herb can be used for happiness? What crystal can be used for motivation? Things like that. That's what a correspondence is. Learning those correspondences is really the best thing that you can do in terms of learning about the craft because you'll probably use those things throughout your craft. Also, learning protection. Don't let the bad vibes in. Don't let the negative energy in. Learn how to protect yourself. Learn what herbs and crystals are associated with protection. Learn how to make a protection jar. Learn how to do protection spells. That stuff is all over the internet. It's in every witchcraft book you could ever find at Barnes and Noble or half price books. And that's something that's really good to learn. Next is moon cycles. Now, I'm going to be honest, I am really bad at keeping track of the moon cycles, as are many witches. So don't feel bad if you're just starting out and you're like, I can never remember what phase the moon is at. Neither can we. It's okay. But it is still good to kind of know what kind of spells correspond with which phases of the moon. Um, just to kind of give you an idea, and maybe in a perfect world, on a full moon one night, you'll remember to do your manifestations. Maybe. Um, I have not remembered the past handful of full moons. You can research things like color magic, meditation. I'd recommend researching intent. Even though intent isn't everything, it is still really important. I recommend researching that. There is a website called Z Library where I think I have this in my resource list as well. You can find millions of books for free. They also have textbooks if you're a college kid. Um, but you can literally just type in witchcraft in the search bar and find so much. So if you're not in a place where you can afford to go and get, a $45 hardback from Barnes and Noble about witchcraft, I get it. Z Library is a great place for you to get resources on witchcraft. If you prefer physical books, I get it. I do too. Thrift Books is a website where you can get discount physical books sent to your door. If you have a half-priced bookstore near you, usually they will have a witchy section or tarot cards, which, as I said before, you can buy yourself. They don't need to be gifted to you. Um, and I think that a lot of people rely on asking their favorite witchy creators something that could be searchable on Google. And I understand why, because you look up to these creators and you trust them and you trust their judgment. Um, and it's fine to ask questions. It's fine for you guys to ask me questions. I love when you guys ask me questions. But I think it's also important to learn how to do your own research as well, which is why I made that research and resource list for you guys to begin with, so that you guys would be able to expand your knowledge beyond the bonds of WitchTok. So, man, that was a little bit of a shorter one today. Um, I am going to open this up for questions. I'm going to keep talking a little while longer, just to buy some time and see if any questions come in, because I know that it can take a couple minutes for you guys to do that. If you have any questions about other beginner resources, books that I recommend, other research resources, TikTokers that I think are actually reliable and will tell you the truth, all those kinds of questions are welcome. In the meantime, next time, so as I said, on my Patreon, I post polls every week for my patrons to vote on future podcast topics. And I posted the poll yesterday for next week's. So next week's topic is going to be all about the left-hand path. Now, I will say, if you don't know, the left-hand path is what some people may refer to as black magic, quote unquote. We don't say that anymore. It has racist connotations behind it, which I will be discussing in that show. It is now referred to as the left-hand path, and quote unquote white magic is referred to as the right-hand path. But next week, we're going to be talking about, yes, the left-hand path, all things baneful magic. When is it okay to perform baneful magic? How can one do so safely? Why is it not for beginners? What kinds of entities and gods and goddesses are associated with baneful magic? That is what we're going to be talking about next week. Let me see. Ask me questions. I don't know. Beginner witches ask me questions all the time, and now I'm all yours. We could be here all night talking about beginner resources of witchcraft. Or even if you want to debate me, if you're like, no, you're a witch and you're gonna fucking burn in hell. Let's debate. I'm ready. Let's go. The floor is yours, I guess, right? I had a guy try to do that for me in one of my first podcasts, trying to like debunk me. Like, let me show you what the Bible says, when I was doing a podcast on what the Bible says. Hashtag Philip. That was interesting. I think if you listen to my Witchcraft in the Bible recording, you'll be able to listen to him trying to debunk me. It was great. He got pissed off and left. So, and that's another thing that, I got to warn you about if you're a beginner. Not everyone is going to like that you are doing craft. My parents did not like that I was doing witchcraft, and they kicked me out of the house for it and destroyed a lot of my items for it. So if you're not aware of that story, you can check out my Unfortunate Events playlist on TikTok that tells the whole story in chronological order. It's terrible. So that's that. Not everyone's gonna like it. Not everyone's gonna agree. Complete strangers, I'll see you wearing a pentagram in Walmart and be like, "That's demonic," and you're just gonna have to live with it, unfortunately, because not everyone is as open-minded. Now, obviously, you don't have to openly display that you're a witch, right? You can be very quiet about it to try and avoid the discrimination, but if Christians can wear a cross to show their faith, then why should I not be allowed to wear a pentagram to show my faith? I don't know. I'm used to the outward discrimination by now. But yeah, I would recommend researching more into the history of witchcraft. If you're subscribed to my Patreon, I will be posting a video tomorrow that kind of goes a bit more in depth into what I was talking about earlier when it comes to early civilizations worshiping nature. I've already planned that out. So make sure, if you want to see that, make sure you subscribe to my Patreon, because along with being able to vote for podcast topics, I post other things as well, including videos from other content creators that I think are important and educational for you guys to see. Trying to think. I've been tempted. I have a YouTube video recorded that I've been tempting to post that talks about like the beginner witchcraft resources as well. So I'll get on that at some point. But as far as WitchTok creators that I recommend, obviously me, spirituality. I like to think that I'm fairly reliable. Unfortunately, TikTok hasn't been working today, so I've had 3 videos not upload. Maybe they'll be uploaded by the time I finish with this. Chaotic Witch Aunt is another great creator. Holy crap. If you're not following Frankie, what are you even doing? They are amazing. They've been practicing for like years, and are very knowledgeable and very resourceful on the craft. Anytime you see like a book recommendation video from a witch on TikTok, save it. Save it. For me in particular, The Path of the Christian Witch by Adelina St. Clair, and any book by Valerie Love. Those just absolutely changed my life. So I'd recommend those. All right, last call for questions while I go on my last little mini tangent. Thank you guys for tuning in. I'm sorry this one wasn't as long, but I hope that I was able to provide you with a little bit of information. Like I said, you can only fit so much about the entire history of witchcraft and paganism into one podcast episode. But I'll be posting a video to my Patreon about it tomorrow if you're more interested in the historical aspects. That'll be Patreon tomorrow. So make sure you subscribe to that if you're not already. It starts at only $1 a month. It's pretty freaking cool. Make sure that you're following me on my other social medias. My Instagram and my Twitter are both spirituality. I like to think that I have a decent sense of humor. I have messages. Why was I not able to see these? Okay.
I'm trying to ask questions, but it seems like it's not going through.
Yeah, I can see. You know why? Of course, now I can see them. Okay, let's get to these. Jeez.
When it comes to your witchcraft, what do you renounce when it comes to Christianity? Like, what are your biggest issues with Christianity, and as it regards to being a Christo-pagan?
It's not so much the religion, it's the people. I never felt like I didn't belong with Jesus, but I felt like I didn't belong in the religion, as an institution. So people trying to shove their beliefs down people's throats, I don't like that. Jesus didn't do that. People just using their religion to be outwardly hateful. Jesus didn't do that. So that's really the biggest things that I renounce when it comes to Christianity. I love Jesus. I love Jesus's message of peace and love, and think it's something that should be preached more. And I have a playlist on my TikTok called Weird Theology that goes into this a little bit more. But that's probably my biggest thing. It's not the religion, it's the people.
There are really good apps, especially with Android.
Witchcraft and Christo-paganism. The Path of the Christian Witch by Adelina St. Clair changed my life. I need to get a physical copy and read it again because it is absolutely incredible. So, I'm trying to think. Yeah, I think that covers everything. I guess the point that I'm really trying to come across is please don't use social media for all of your research, especially when it comes to the craft or religion of any kind. It is okay to get some of your information from social media because there are people who make videos about things that are correct, but always be skeptical. Always fact check, always cross reference. And I know that sounds so exhausting, but that is a huge aspect of witchcraft is doing research, and the research never stops, the learning never stops. But I think that's pretty cool. I have books scattered all over my room, and it's a great time. I love doing research. And as I said, if you go to my TikTok page, click my TikTok bio, you will find something that says Witchcraft and Spirituality Resource List. And it's a Google Doc. It should be open and available to everyone. It's free. And you'll be able to find all of the websites and books that I recommend to help you kind of kickstart your witchcraft and spirituality journey. So that's all I have for now, unless I get any more questions in the 30 seconds left that I have for talking. Feel free to send them in. Make sure that you're following me on social media. TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter are all spirituality, spelled TEA. It's a pun. It's hilarious. And I wish more people appreciated it. Make sure you subscribe to my Patreon to get all the fun perks and the video tomorrow, sometime this week, that I plan on posting that kind of divulges a bit more into the history of witchcraft. And yeah, next week we're going to be talking about Baneful Magic, the Left-Hand Path. That should be a very interesting talk. If you want to be able to vote on future podcast topics, because the Left-Hand Path was voted on, and this topic was voted on by my patrons, make sure you subscribe to my Patreon. You'll be able to vote, and you have lots of other cool perks as well. I'm going to go see if TikTok finally frickin' uploaded my videos. And with that, I bid you all good night.